چیرگی بر دانش و انرژی هسته‌ای و مقابله با انزوای سیاسی و تحریم‌های اقتصادی از جمله مسائل عدیده‌ای است که کشور ما امروز با آن مواجه. آیا دولت فعلی جمهوری اسلامی با توجه به عدم مشروعیت داخلی توانایی مقابله با این نوع مسائل رو داراست؟ سلام، من حمید دباشی هستم از نیویورک و این برنامه شما هفته سبز. با سلام مجدد. میهمان این برنامه ما آقای رابرت درایفوس، یکی از برجسته‌ترین روزنامه‌نگاران مجله امریکایی نیشن هستند که لطف کردند و دعوت ما رو برای این صحبت پذیرفتند. Thank you, Mr. Dreyfuss, for accepting our invitation. My first question has to do with your current assessment of the green movement. What do you think has been the most important achievements of the green movement so far? And what do you think are its prospects in future?
First of all, there's several achievements that they've made already. One is they've really changed the way the whole world looks at Iran. Before June, I think, people saw Iran as kind of a quasi-democracy, but now I think people around the world have come to realize that there's a real living opposition movement in Iran. And it's also made people think that Iran is not a monolith, that in fact it's a very complex country with a lot of different political currents in it. But I guess the most important achievement is that they have delegitimized the regime because the election aftermath has forced the regime to come out fairly nakedly in opposition to what clearly was a mass movement for some kind of political change. Now, all of that being said, I think there's a very, very difficult road ahead. I'm not one of the people who thinks that Iran is on the brink of regime change or revolution or anything like that.
What do you think has been the effect of this nonviolent movement in the region, infested as the region is with all sorts of violence?
First of all, it's caused Iran to look more inward. It's caused the regime to focus more on its domestic political challenges. So to the extent that Iran was trying to emerge as a regional power, using its influence in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Lebanon, in Palestine, with Hamas and Hezbollah, I think all of those things now are somewhat in doubt because the Iranians have to focus more internally. I think that for the Israelis and others who are worried about Iran's nuclear program, I think that there are more and more people, even in Israel, but especially in the United States, who see that the political clock in Iran is moving faster than the nuclear clock. In other words, people who are concerned about Iran developing a military nuclear capability are a little more relaxed now because they think that Iran might see some sort of political change before they could actually go all the way to having a nuclear weapon. And so therefore, I think it's eased some of the tension in the region. But I do think that there's still a lot of concern among all of Iran's neighbors. In that part of the world, there's a lot of authoritarian regimes who don't have any elections. If they do have elections, they're sham elections, they're fake. I think there's a likelihood that some of the people, let's say in Egypt, in Jordan, in Saudi Arabia, and probably some other countries too, let's say in Pakistan, are looking at Iran and saying, wait a minute, if they can express themselves in such a massive way, why are we in our countries, unable to express ourselves in that way? And I think in that sense, it's going to have some impact, again, sort of a long-term impact on the way people in these countries think about their futures in terms of evolving into democracies over time.
And what are your thoughts on the nuclear issue?
I think Obama has handled it just about right by saying that he stands with people who want their human rights, But meanwhile, he wants to negotiate. He wants to talk to the government. He's willing to come to an agreement about the nuclear program with the current government, because that's, after all, the job of the United States is not to go around changing regimes everywhere. I think the consequences of a military attack are unpredictable on all sides and would be horrible and catastrophic. Many thousands of people would die. There's no telling what impact it would have inside Iran. There's no telling how Iran would react. I think that's the last thing that anybody wants. But I will say that I do think that a confrontational policy toward Iran by the West, even these kind of harsh or crippling sanctions that some people talk about, the threat of military attack strengthens Ahmadinejad. Paradoxically, it was Obama's reaching out to Iran a year ago that helped build the Green Movement, because people inside Iran said, we need a leader who can be a partner in a dialogue with the United States on an equal basis. And we don't need somebody like Ahmadinejad who's going to, make bombastic speeches.
What about sanctions? Do you think it's a good strategy? Will they work?
Sanctions very rarely work against any countries. We've had sanctions against Cuba since 1960. It's 50 years now. The one thing I would add is that I do think that the economic isolation of Iran is having an impact. I think there are a lot of people in Iran, businessmen and other people, who want Iran to have an opening to the West. They want to have access to technology, investment, in oil and gas technology, in aircraft, in computers, and all the things that they need from the West that they're not able to have direct access to now. So I think it isn't so much the sanctions, but just the economic isolation and the fact that even businesses, never mind governments, are afraid to go into Iran and engage because they're not sure about the political ramifications of that. So I think, clearly there's a lot of pressure inside Iran to break out of this isolation. And unfortunately, it's not going to happen under the current government, I don't think.
Do you see a role for Americans to play in support of the Green Movement? And by American, I mean American people.
Personally, I don't think there should be any American role. Now, I'm glad you made a distinction between American people and government. Certainly, I don't think that the American government should get involved in supporting the opposition, nor do I think they want that support. But I think it would be used by the government, as a hammer against the opposition. They're already making that argument that the whole movement was created by the United States and the British. And so as far as the American people go, I think the first step before they can start talking about getting involved with the Green Movement, American people are incredibly ignorant about Iran. They're misinformed. They don't understand Iran. They have memories of the embassy takeover 30 years ago, and all they think of when they think about Iran, they're afraid, they think about terrorism. So I think there's a big education job in the United States to change the fundamental attitudes of the American people about Iran, so that they're less fearful and more understanding of the complexities of this country.
در آخرین ملاقات میرحسین موسوی و مهدی کروبی، نخست وزیر سابق جمهوری اسلامی با انتقاد از سیاست‌های موجود در کشور گفت: اغلب سیاست‌های ما باری به هر جهت است و متاسفانه ساختارهای ما همچون ماسه‌زار و شنزاری است که آب در آن پایدار نمی‌ماند. به طور قطع دولت و رژیمی که از بیخ و بن مشروعیت مردمی، مقبولیت عام و مرجعیت قانون اساسی خود را از دست داده است، در موضع ضعف قرار گرفته و در مقام و حدی نیست که منافع ملی ما را پیریزی کرده و در مجامع بین‌المللی از آنها دفاع کند. برعکس، با حرفهای سخیف در مورد رابطه نوع لباس زنان با احتمال وقوع زلزله از تریبیون‌های رسمی بیش از پیش آبروی ملت ما را در انظار جهانی می‌برند. وظیفه خطیر پیش روی ما امروز تعریف و تبیین منافع خطیر ملی ما در ژئوپلیتیک منطقه است. دولت بیکفایت محمود احمدی نژاد به طور قطع از این مهم بر نمی آید. من حمید دباشی هستم از نیویورک. تا هفته سبز دیگه، خدا نگهدار.
خدایا به اسم تو ما رو میزنن، میکشن. اسمتم که میاریم بازم میزنم. ما کیو باور کنیم؟ به کی پناه ببریم؟ با کی حرف بزنیم؟ اصلا صدامونو میشنویم؟ ز تو چشم یاری ما داشتیم، خود غلط بودم چه پنداشتیم. ما قطره های باران